Speakers tonight. Thank you, Abigail, for turning on the recording. It's our custom in these Economic Development Finance Working Group expert sessions to record. Actually, all of our meetings are recorded because not everybody can join us, and we really wanted to make sure that this information is widely accessible. And so tonight we have a suite of three speakers, guest speakers, experts in their own right, and I will allow them to do introductions more deep than I will provide. But the subject we called together is a rather broad umbrella of climate finance. And so you'll hear about projects happening in the climate finance opportunities in the forest health space, in the energy and local energy and renewable energy space, and then from our state partners at the iBank, some of their climate catalyst funding that is a great program that we'll hear about from Daniel. So I think our basic format is about 20 minutes each for the speakers. We'll go in a sequential order of Phil, Matthew, and then Daniel to wrap it up, if that makes sense. And you have 20 minutes-ish, and then 5 to 10 minutes Q&A, and then, of course, there's the chat and, all kinds of follow-up. But yeah, I think, is there any questions from any of the guests about any of that? Okay, great. Well, then I will say, Phil from Blue Forest Conservation, you should be able to share your screen if you want to present slides. And, I'll just say a little bit. I first met Phil in a meeting in Sonoma County where he was presenting the Blue Forest Conservation Framework to an economic development business community down there. And, that was kind of my first exposure to Blue Forest Conservation, although it has now come up many times in the work that we've done. And one of Phil's, I guess your co-founder, Zach, participated in the Biomass Utilization Symposium that the Sonoma Mendocino Economic Development District put on earlier this year. And there was just strong interest in the subject and the topics. And then I know Layla brought it up at our last meeting, the Blue Forest Conservation topic. So it was very timely, Phil, that you were able to join us. And I think the audience here will find your material quite interesting. So with that, Phil, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Josh, and appreciate the invite to speak here today and on your Climate Finance Day, I guess is what I would call it. I'll share my screen here. So, Blue Forest is a nonprofit conservation finance organization based in Sacramento, where I'm sitting today at a lovely 103 degrees this warm September afternoon. I'll talk a little bit about, what conservation finance is and what we do as an organization, but really wanted to kick it off with our land acknowledgement. Being based here in Sacramento, we have folks, certainly across the country, but being registered in Sacramento, we are on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homelands of the Miwok and Nisenan people and the gathering places of the Patwin-Wintun and Maidu people. These homelands include the Sacramento, American, and Cosumnes rivers, sacred sites, and cultural landscapes that make up their rich heritage. We also recognize the Wilton Rancheria tribe, the only federally recognized tribe in Sacramento County, and the Native nations, both federally and non-federally recognized, that call the greater region home. And I don't get into it today, but our commitment to Native nations goes, beyond this land acknowledgement. We have a Indigenous community land manager on staff here at Blue Forest that works to incorporate tribal perspectives on all the projects in which we work. As I mentioned, Blue Forest is a conservation finance organization, and through that lens, we do two things on the projects that we work on. One is we raise both traditional and what we call new sources of funding for project work. So for forest restoration work and forest management work. And the second thing we do is we leverage those commitments into a financing that we call the Forest Resilience Bond that I'll talk about in a little bit. And what we do is we provide capital to implementation partners to be able to do the work as quickly as possible. As all of you know in your various roles, cash flow can be a real challenge, particularly when you're working with things like large reimbursable grants from state or federal resources and other commitments that don't necessarily line up when, payrolls need to be out the door and lease payments on large equipment needs to be paid. So we work to align those sources of funding with the folks that can use that and deploy it on these projects as quickly as possible. We're really based in kind of three pillars at Blue Forest, really thinking about where's the science in all this work as chief scientist of Blue Forest. This is really kind of a lot of my team's work, which is understanding what are the outcomes of forest and watershed restoration that motivate these traditional and new sources of funding and bring them to the table. And a lot of the things that we think about are certainly wildfire risk reduction is top of mind for everybody these days, but also source watershed protection, public health, recreation benefits, all of the things that folks want to see out of these projects. The second thing we do is we bring finance to the table. And it's really from a perspective of, we've used finance in our society to build our built infrastructure for decades and centuries. And what we're really doing at Blue Forest is deploying those same tools on our natural infrastructure or those forests and watersheds so that we can do projects more quickly, aligned with the challenge that we're facing with wildfire today, where we actually need to be operating at scale today and not tomorrow. And then finally, we're deeply rooted in collaboration. So on all of our projects, there are multiple partners that play a role. We have a very kind of specific funding and finance role, but the other roles that our partners play, from the local landowners and land managers on our projects, from the implementation partners to the community organizations, it's really, a community that brings these projects together more than anything else. As I mentioned, Blue Forest is grounded in science, and here are two examples of the ways that we work to really bring science to the forefront of what we do. On the right here, you'll see a report that we did with the California Council on Science and Technology, where we really wanted to ask the question of, what are the smoke impacts, both, real human health impacts and economic costs associated with those impacts in California from wildfires and from large wildfires. And what we found from that work was certainly there's a lot more research that needs to be done, but ultimately nobody's really tracking this information in a uniform way. And so our recommendation to the state and to the state legislature, they took up a bill earlier this year, was let's start tracking this information, because if we have information on costs, then we can work on ways that we can invest in forest restoration, wildfire mitigation up front that ultimately could reduce the cost to our public health agencies, the VA, healthcare companies that are, and health insurers that are paying for this at the end of the day. And if you look across the economic costs of wildfire, the way I think of it is, source water supply protection is really, the value of that is in the millions to tens of millions of dollars. Fire suppression costs really, with the Dixie Fire, are approaching $500 million per event. But human health costs of wildfire smoke start in the billions of dollars annually. And so when we think about costs and how we start to motivate funding into this space, we realize that, health impacts of this work are some of the biggest economic drivers of what we do. On the left was a paper our team published, led by my colleague Kim Sipe, that really looked at what are all the potential outcomes we should be looking at when we're thinking about forest management projects. And you see the different outcomes that we have listed here, and in other parts of the paper, we look at each one and say, well, is it monetizable? Is it something somebody will pay to ultimately see that outcome? Is it transactable? Are there markets for it existing? Do we need to develop new markets for these outcomes? What does that look like? And then what are the non-market values that you can see kind of towards the right, where really there isn't a monetary factor involved, but there are still outcomes that provide value. And again, what we call non-market values. And so it's really bringing this perspective to all of our projects. How do we stack these benefits, the value of these benefits, to see projects come together? And we roll all of those into a financial product that we call the Forest Resilience Bond. And I'll walk you through this slide here, but I want to acknowledge the role that we play. And the role we play here is twofold. One is, we work with beneficiaries to obtain funding commitments. And those are both, again, traditional like grant sources of funding, but also new funding commitments from utilities and corporations that sign long-term contracts to support projects. We also, on a second role, wrap all of those grant agreements and long-term funding commitments into the financial vehicle that we call the Forest Resilience Bond. And the Forest Resilience Bond is a LLC. It's a subsidiary of Blue Forest. And it has no employees, but it can do two things. It can hold contracts and it can make loan agreements. And so we're able to sign commitments from private investors, and we're also able to provide that funding to our implementation partners on the ground. The way this all gets set up and the way we structure this as project developers is we look at projects that have been planned and permitted. So those are the restoration activities you see up here on the right. As we understand the benefits of that project being implemented, so the fire suppression and water supply protection and other benefits, we work with beneficiaries, infrastructure owners. So, these can be even like roads and railroads that run through a project area. These can be certainly your electric and water utilities. And again, these are corporates that are interested in, from a sustainability standpoint, as well as a water replenishment standpoint, seeing these projects happen. We raise funding for the whole project. And again, we wrap those contracts and grant agreements into the Forest Resilience Bond. We then go to investors and say, we have this great project, we have these commitments. It's a really low risk project that we've designed, so we can sign very favorable rates, loan commitments from investors in ways that provides us a real advantage to, I think, a lot of traditional sources of financing from, say, banks or institutional investors alone. We then provide that funding to that investment capital to our implementation partners at no cost to them. How do we do this? We ensure some of the beneficiary commitments, some of that new funding, because oftentimes grant funding can't pay for interest and financing fees. Some of the new funding gets deployed to pay investors their small rate of return, as well as cover any financing costs. In this way, we're able to provide that capital at no cost to the implementation partner. We're not looking to create an additional financial burden on them. They can move ahead with the restoration activities as quickly as possible. Those benefits accrue, and the beneficiaries repay the Forest Resilience Bond with the commitments that they've made. So some of the benefits of the FRB, one is with the new funding sources, we can close funding gaps for implementation. And the nice thing about those new funding sources is they're not restricted to grant guidelines. A lot of times, my favorite example of this is we had a project where we had $10 million of grant funding lined up for forest restoration, forest management, but we didn't have the $1 million to pay for the road work for the machines to get in and do that work. And so $1 million that could not be paid by those $10 million of grants were holding up a large project that had a lot of benefits coming out of it. And so this is where we look for new sources of funding and say, okay, well, how can we make this project happen? We also unlock financing to increase the pace of implementation. So we don't want folks to be limited by the size of their bank accounts or how quickly they can pay contractors or how much contractor debt they're willing to take on. We want to ease those cash flow constraints by providing low-cost financing. In addition, these kinds of projects tend to attract, more funding, more beneficiaries, and we're able to do larger projects over time. We use a pilot to scale model where we might try this at a smaller scale and then expand it in the same place with the same partners to do more work on the ground more quickly. And I'll explain a little bit about that in our Tahoe Forest project. And finally, we work a lot on communication. We want to communicate like what are the benefits of forest restoration, how are we working with partners, and the great work that our partners do. The project case study I'll talk about here is the Yuba 1 and 2 forest resilience bonds. The Yuba 1 forest resilience bond was launched in 2018. It was a $4 million project to restore 15,000 acres in the headwaters of the North Yuba River watershed. The Yuba 2 forest resilience bond was a $25 million forest resilience bond designed to restore the next 50,000 acres at the bottom of this watershed. And so our partners here, and our implementation partner being the National Forest Foundation, and the beneficiaries being both CAL FIRE, the Wildlife Conservation Board, and the Yuba Water Agency, are the large utility that owns and operates New Bullard's Bar here at the bottom of the reservoir. So they would be severely impacted if a fire were to happen in their watershed. And after the Yuba 1 Forest Resilience Bond launched, it catalyzed the formation of this North Yuba Forest Partnership, a coalition of 9 partners, state and federal and local governments, small NGOs, large NGOs, to come together and say, how do we restore this 275,000 acre watershed in a way that we can do that effectively over the next 20 years. And the result of that was certainly the Yuba 2 Forest Resilience Bond, but also a planning document that covers most of this area. And our next area of focus will be around the Downeyville and that central part of the watershed. Our project pipeline is really across the Western U.S., just showing the 3 westernmost states here. We've got a few launched already. This Rogue River Siskiyou Valley Forest Resilience Bond in Southern Oregon. We've got our 2 Tahoe Forest Resilience Bonds and our El Dorado Forest Resilience Bond launched. We are close to launching our first private lands. And I know in the North Bay Area you work with, there are a lot of private lands. There aren't as many large federal land managers as there are in the Tahoe National Forest. Or much of the Sierra. So we're about to launch with Pheasants Forever, our first private lands, working with NRCS EQIP dollars as part of those projects. And actually tomorrow we're launching our Upper Wenatchee 1 Forest Resilience Bond. A lot of our folks are up in Wenatchee this evening getting ready for the public launch and event there tomorrow, which we're pretty excited about. Oh, and going back, you'll see that our implementation partner ranges from counties, resource conservation districts, National Forest Foundation, so other nonprofits. So it's a variety of folks that we work with. It's not one single type of implementation partner. Moving on, as I realize I have a few minutes left here to wrap up, I did want to also talk about our Wildfire Innovation Fund. So this is our 10-year closed-end $50 million fund to invest in biomass utilization. As we were deploying more forest resilience bonds, we realized that the low-value material in these projects is often piled and burned. And what we wanted to do is find a way to get that material off the land more quickly, because it can take a while to do those pile burns, and also have a more useful end life for that material outside of simply burning it in place. You might hear a little bit from the iBank and Daniel here in a bit, but we just closed our second investor into this fund, the iBank, to complete our $50 million fundraise. And we've so far invested in 3 projects across Northern California. And similar to our forest resilience bonds, we really take a partnership approach to our biomass utilization investments. We look to leverage existing sources of public funding. There's certainly a significant amount of federal and state grants available for supporting biomass utilization. And currently, we work with a lot of companies that interact with public land management and even our forest resilience bonds in ways that we understand the challenges of working with public land managers like the Forest Service to obtain feedstock and agreements and long-term supply chains. So understanding that, hey, if we've got a forest resilience bond that we're financing and there's a biomass utilization facility nearby, those 2 entities are likely to benefit each other. And then we're just looking to build, a network of partners in this space to really understand, where do investments need to be made. And we're even we have a grant from the USDA, Wood Innovation Grant, to provide technical assistance to companies simply to get them investment ready where they might not be currently. And the last thing I want to leave you with before opening it up for questions here is the next thing we're looking at is really workforce development. So if you think of, both forest restoration, forest management, and biomass utilization as two legs of a stool, we really see this as the third leg. So understanding how can we support organizations that are training the next generation of folks working in this industry. We know that an additional, 50 million acres of land has been identified by the Forest Service that needs restoration across the Western US. The $5 billion of commitments from the Bill and IRA funds are a great down payment on that, but there's a lot more funding and work that needs to get done. And we know that groups like conservation corps are critical for really achieving the workforce that we need to deploy effectively, efficiently, and quickly more restoration work in this space. We know that those organizations, like the implementation partners we work with, often experience cash flow constraints from reimbursable grants, the same kinds of grants that fund restoration work in the forest. We also know those organizations often face elevated interest rates just because of the types of organizations that they are, the types of revenue that come into those organizations, and the fact that traditional banks often don't understand grant mechanisms and the way they work. Whereas we have Blue Forest, that's the work that we do day in and day out with our partners. And so what we're interested in learning from our partners, from many of you on this call, is what are the needs in this space? How can we develop a financing product that could be helpful, useful, and where are the challenges that workforce development organizations are really experiencing in this area that we could be of assistance. With that, I'll just wrap it up, and I want to say thanks again, Josh and Abigail, for inviting me to chat today. Questions? And maybe there's some that have come in from the chat I can't see.
Well, thank you, Phil. That is just an impressive scope and vision for how to move projects at scale in the forest. It's not a simple equation, as we've heard on more than once. So I think just helping people understand that these types of mechanisms are there, and finding those, implementation partners is super important and highly relevant to what this group is, kind of focused on. And so I know just in the work that we're doing, and I expect others on the call for, just having this exposure will help, navigate towards those specific partnering opportunities. I can't say, just earlier this summer, I was up in the upper Yuba, North Fork of the Yuba, and saw active forest treatments going on. And I was, it crossed my mind as I was driving along, and there's mile after mile of really active treatment going on in this, forest. Like, how did this happen? So, I think just seeing that action on the ground, it's really a testament to the work. And all up and down the North Coast, as you heard or know about from the work in Sonoma County, especially, and there's just a big need for wildfire risk reduction, post wildfire restoration, all of that kind of stuff. So I think that this is a good home for the message. Anyone on the call here have question for the moment for Phil? Okay, so you left your contact information there, and we'll have all of that posted on the website, and I'm sure that there will be outcomes that will follow from this.
Great. And I've shared my slide deck, so that'll be coming to all of you as well. And I'll put my email in the chat here as well for easy access.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we're going to shift a little bit into the renewable energy space. And for those of you from the Redwood Coast, Humboldt area, I guess Matthew Marshall doesn't need much of an introduction, but for those of you from outside the area, I can tell you that he's done an impressive body of 15 years of work as the executive director of the Redwood Coast Energy Authority, and then recently made a shift over to seems where all the greats end up at the Blue Lake Rancheria. Jason Ramos building his team over there. So, Matthew, we'd love to hear about what you have to say on financing energy projects and other topics of relevance. And the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, and let me share my screen. Let's go. There we go. Yeah, so I'm gonna just provide a little bit of an overview on energy project financing. And my background is not in finance, but it's in energy, and certainly it's sort of a key part of the puzzle when working on an energy project, is how you're going to pay for it. And there's quite a lot of activity in the energy finance realm at different scales. So I'm just going to kind of provide some thoughts and a little bit more of a focus on sort of like I guess you could say the consumer end of things, of working with small businesses or even residents, and what kinds of options are out there. So, one thing that sort of makes energy financing appealing is that there's a good return for businesses, in particular, but for anybody doing an energy project, the bill savings goes right to your bottom line. And so just to sort of for context, I'll put up a case study. This is an older case study, but Bonamini Market in Eureka, it's a little corner market. They did a lighting retrofit project a couple years back. And this was something that the Redwood Coast Energy Authority helped them with. And so I dug out this case study from my experience back then. So they're going to see, over $2,000 a year in energy savings. And, the payback for that project was like less than a year and a half. I think it was like 1.3 years or something like that for to basically cover the cost of the retrofit and then just be, savings on their bill going forward. And I think one of the things that put it in context from a small business standpoint is, for a restaurant or a corner market, they might have a profit to sales ratio of, only like 5%, maybe for a restaurant, or 10%, depending on what the business is. And so, when you think about, pocketing $2,000 for them to have, that same level of, bottom line result would be like a $34,000 increase in sales, or, for a convenience store, that's like 6,000 bags of chips they'd have to sell for $5.50 to have the same impact of just, one afternoon project of swapping out their, antiquated fixtures for modern high efficiency fixtures, which also improve the quality of the space. And a lot of businesses are doing lighting upgrades these days to improve the space, not just for the energy savings. And then from sort of a finance perspective, it's a good deal for lenders because those savings don't tend to go down; they tend to go up. So it's not something that's a risky endeavor. As long as the facility is still there and operating, which obviously that could be a consideration. If this is just a PG&E residential rates, and I had to put that red X there because this is a year old, and so that's where it is now. In 2014, I think it's about 47 cents for the sort of average bundled rate for customers, and so being able to reduce those costs through energy projects, it's, unless somebody invents cold fusion and there's some sort of revolution, we're not going to tend to see, energy prices plummet where you're going to have, regret having invested in a solar project or an energy efficiency project. And, mostly talking about energy facility kind of perspectives, but when thinking about, particularly commercial operations. And if folks have fleet vehicles, despite the fact that electricity prices are going up, the economics of electric vehicles are pretty appealing. So Blue Lake Rancheria has a gas station, a couple blocks from where I'm at, and the current price of gas is $4.85 for regular over there. And if you were to plug in an electric fleet vehicle to charge, the cost equivalent for electricity to fuel your vehicle instead of gas would be about $1 cheaper a gallon if you did it during the day. So like around 385. And if you actually charged it at night when the vehicle's parked anyway and not doing anything, then you're going to see like $2 off of that. So it's going to be like 285. So, even with current electricity prices for a commercial customer that has fleet vehicles, charging a vehicle at night is closer to, 285 a gallon of gas equivalent to move that vehicle around, compared to, fueling it with gasoline or diesel. And that's just, forgetting the environmental benefits of zero emission vehicles. There's a potential, there's an upfront cost associated with that, although there's a lot of incentives and rebates available to help address that. And so, running the economics on vehicle fleets is something that is worthwhile for those that have vehicle fleets. So, I think, with energy projects, there's a lot of policy support for, doing clean energy work, energy efficiency work. One of the largest ones right now is the tax credits. The Inflation Reduction Act enhanced a lot of that and added scope. So, pretty much anything you could think of is covered by that. And there's also now the direct pay option for public agencies and tribes to be able to get a cash payment instead of a tax credit for those non-tax entities. And there's also adders for projects that are serving low-income communities or serving tribal communities, and for having good labor practices. And so could potentially be more than 30% off the project cost. And so that's right there is a fairly significant incentive. And then there are still rebates for energy efficiency and energy storage projects. People are always saying, are there solar rebates? And I'm like, not really, but 30% off the cost of the system from a tax credit is pretty good. And then for other types of projects, there are still rebates and incentives that businesses and residents can take advantage. And so those things kind of help buy down the project. And then, in the financing realm, those things can make sense even with conventional financing, but there's a number of, government supported financing programs to help reduce the cost of financing specifically for energy projects. And I'm just going to kind of touch on a few of those just to get them on everyone's radar. And these are focused on sort of the facility side of things. So PG&E has an on-bill financing program, which has 0% interest rates for up to 10-year terms. And, so that's a pretty good rate. It's only for energy efficiency projects. So the eligibility is fairly narrow, and you have to, kind of meet, project requirements. It's for projects, the minimum size is 5,000. And so, sometimes smaller projects won't be eligible for this, although, ideally, you'd be able to figure out how to get something that's just a couple $1,000 financed, but that can be a barrier for small businesses. And so, that's a pretty desirable term. And as the name implies, you repay it on your utility bill. And so basically, your bill stays sort of the same for a certain period of time. And then once the loan's paid off, then the savings continue. So it's sort of designed to be bill neutral until you pay off the loan. And you can, pay it off other ways as well. But it's a fairly straightforward program that is pretty desirable if your project is eligible. You can't do solar with this. You can't do electric vehicle charging. There's a very narrow focus of types of projects, and this is only for commercial customers. The state Go Green financing program is similar. That they've got varying rates Because there's a pool of different lenders. And so basically this is, private lenders participate in this, and the state provides like a loan loss reserve structure so that, if there's defaults, then you can recover a part of that. And so, and it's designed to incentivize, lower rates by providing that loan loss reserve fund. And then also the structure of that is designed to help incentivize smaller projects, and that you get a bigger sort of reserve fund for littler projects to kind of encourage, not just large, sort of more lucrative projects. And again, this is 5,000 up to 5 million for these projects. And it's a broader scope. There's both residential and smaller business, which almost every business in our region is a small business by the usual definitions. And this one, in addition to being able to fund a broader range of potential sort of energy measures, you can include non-energy costs up to 30%. And so that one's kind of, like a sort of a clearinghouse, and, you can go to their webpage, and there's a number of different lenders, and they each have, slightly different offerings. And so it's basically a commercial loan, but with this, loan loss reserve component that the state's providing. Another financing program that's out there is through the California Energy Commission, which is like the ECA loan program, or Energy Conservation Assistance Act loan program. And that's 0% for schools, or 1% for other public entities, cities, counties, special districts, tribes. And those can be up to 20-year loans. There's no minimum for these, up to $3 million per project. And basically they're similar to sort of the on-bill financing program, at that they have to have sort of a payback period for the measures you're installing. So it can be renewable energy or storage, but they want to see kind of like the return on that, and then they structure the loan payments to basically be whatever the savings you're realizing is your loan payment. So you're kind of cost neutral until it's paid off, and then you recover the savings. And so the loans are they're they have to be within the effective useful life of the equipment you're installing, and to be able to align with sort of the economics of the energy project, like which again kind of makes it a fairly safe bet for a lender. If you're saying, hey, the savings is going to be equal or greater than the cost of servicing the loan, then that pencils out well. And then I was going to mention something that's coming soon is this Clean Community Investment Accelerator project. And it's was just recently a $400 million award from the EPA to the native CDFI network to help sort of catalyze clean energy project financing. They're partnering with 63 native serving community development financial institutions. And the reason why I bring it up is because one of those partners is North Edge, and then also the Blue Lake Rancheria was included as a project partner to provide sort of technical assistance on how to scope out projects and provide kind of input on the project side for lenders and tribes that are taking advantage of the program. And so that's something in the works, but have a couple local partners here that are going to be participating in that much larger national program. And so, kind of to close, I sort of thought, well, gosh, if energy projects are so great and there's all these great programs, then why aren't all the projects just done? And like, why are there still, untapped opportunities? And, I think where it comes down to for any project to happen, there has to be sort of the initial scoping of the project and identifying the opportunity. There's securing the financing to be able to pay for it, whatever that mechanism of paying for the project is. And then there's actually executing the project and like moving it forward and getting it actually built, and depending on the size of the project, that can be, a significant kind of engineering construction effort. Sometimes it's not so complicated. I talked mainly about sort of facility type financing programs. Phil was talking about, biomass energy programs at sort of a community scale. And obviously there's, community scale or larger sort of utility type energy projects, and those are different kinds of economic opportunities and would have different financing than those kind of facility type programs I mentioned. And there's a lot of other financing, options out there that are, targeting different, there's USDA programs, there's tribally focused programs. But I think, for those 3 steps of the process of figuring out what project you should do, how are you going to pay for it, and then actually getting it done, there can be capacity gaps for all of the scale. So if you're a Walmart or something, then yeah, they're tending to do whatever they can, and they've got energy managers, and they're going to go through, and that's why you see, batteries and solar arrays at those types of facilities. But for a lot of public agencies and for small businesses, and certainly for residential customers as well, there's often, it's just not a priority. People aren't an expert, so being able to figure out what the right project is and whether it's a viable project, and then actually kind of going through the motions of getting that identified, and then figuring out, well, gosh, how should I finance this? And depending on if you fit into one of these kinds of programs, how to access that, and then obviously actually seeing the project through. And so, when I was with the Redwood Coast Energy Authority, something we'd see a lot with small businesses would, people would get the assessment, they'd say, hey, here's a project, it's got a 1-year payback. It's straightforward, we can help you do this. And then, that report would sit on somebody's desk because they got other, they're making pizza, or they're running a small city or whatever. And so I think, one of the challenges is not so much the technical or even the access to financing, is helping people, kind of through those steps of getting their project scoped, financed, and then implemented. And so, with just, everyone's bandwidth and capacity being limited, figuring out how to kind of handhold through that process. And certainly there's programs at places like RCA and in other parts of the region, there's other providers, but, helping people kind of go through that. And sometimes the financing piece isn't always, within the scope of some of the technical assistances out there. And so I think, as a region and as entities, kind of making sure that all the puzzle pieces come together, and helping folks that don't have capacity access those things is kind of a key piece to what is otherwise sometimes a pretty straightforward economic proposition. So thanks for having me, and happy to answer any questions now or at the end of the session.
Thanks, Matthew. That was great. Very practical information there. And I think addressing those capacity gaps, that seems like a real need. I don't know if that's come up in any of the proposed projects, but seems like it should be noted. What is the role that I think the Rancheria is playing with getting out some, like, I know Jason talked at one point about using the Blue Lake microgrid as a case study for other tribal areas. Are you involved with kind of that work and extending that as a model?
Yeah, one of the big local efforts is there's a coalition of partners, including the Blue Lake Rancheria, the Yurok tribe, the Karuk tribe, and the Hoopa Valley tribe, working with Redwood Coast Energy Authority and the Shot City Research Center at Cal Poly Humboldt to basically kind of move microgrid technology to the next level and really do multiple sort of nested community microgrids, addressing what's currently one of the least reliable parts of the PG&E grid, which is out in the Hoopa circuit, which is just that's the fancy word for a power line that goes basically it goes from Hoopa up to Wichipec and serves the Yurok tribe, and then it goes all the way out to Orleans and Somes Bar and the Creek communities out there. And so there'll be these multiple microgrids that are going to be able to interact and turn that from like the least reliable in the territory to like one of the most reliable and one of the most decarbonized renewable circuits. And so Blue Lake's role in that is to really use our microgrid facilities here, and we're going to be upgrading them as part of the project to kind of be the laboratory test case for the technology to enable those larger systems. And so I think, you know, that's a particular kind of very large, cool project that's going to support that. But I think, you know, the other aspect is it doesn't always have to be complicated, you know, so sometimes it's like, that's sort of like, oh, this is going to be the most cutting edge, cool thing. But, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of, you know, replicate what's happened here at the Rancheria and, you know, and adapt it sort of at the right scale and at the right level of complexity. So, you know, that system out there requires something very complex and, you know, thanks to the leadership of the tribe, you know, Blue Lake's willing to sort of be the lab rat for how to make that work with our facilities here so it can be scaled up. But you know, the like the convenience store microgrid we have is a much more straightforward system, you know, and part of the idea of that was to have something that could be replicable. There's convenience stores everywhere, you know, they're critical infrastructure. And so, you know, I think something that you know, the resilience campus, the TAM resilience campus that's under construction right now out the window is, you know, there's some steel going up, you know, as we speak. And to have that be kind of a living laboratory and a learning space to help kind of share best practices and provide, you know, training. Because I think, you know, one of the things where financing can really come in is, okay, you know, this project with the 4 tribes, like, hey, it's going to get, you know, $88 million of Department of Energy grant funding to kind of do this new technological innovation, but not everybody can get an $80 million grant. And so it's like, well, okay, how do you do a microgrid, you know, where you're not just going for grant after grant after grant, because that's, you know, not really sustainable and replicable if, you know, you're always looking for R&D grants. And so I think for, you know, achieving renewable energy goals and resilience goals, being able to say, hey, this pencils out, let's just finance it. Let's not wait for a grant. Let's figure out how to deploy, you know, these types of systems with financing rather than, you know, relying on, you know, competitive opportunities, which may or may not come and, you know, you know, and that's going to, you know, necessarily constrain the scale of what you can do. Whereas if you're tapping into, you know, the larger opportunity for investment, then you don't have to kind of sit around and wait for a grant opportunity to move your project forward.
Okay, great information, and the resources out at Blue Lake will continue to grow as sounds like as a information demonstration education center, and we'll know who to ping next time we have more energy questions. Is there anyone else here on the call that wants to put a question up for Matthew before we shift gears yet again?
I've got a quick one for you, Matthew.
Go ahead, Layla.
Thank you. I have heard that next to nobody has successfully yet gone through the new tax credits scheme, the direct pay, and therefore can sort of tell the rest of us how it works and where the hurdles and barriers are to avoid. In particular, I think I've heard that no tribal nation has gone through it. I was wondering if you've heard more.
I have not heard more. We have not yet gone through it, but we have some eligible activities, you know, happening right now. And, you know, sometimes it's like things get delayed. So we had like a battery system that like had some interconnection challenges and is finally going online. But the good news is, because it has been idle, it's now within the window of it wasn't operational, and so we're going to be able to push that through. And so hopefully very shortly we will have direct experience with going through that process and seeing how it shakes out. So I've read the rules, and I've been beefing up on kind of the process of doing that, but I'm not familiar with anyone that has done it yet. And so once we dive into that in the next couple months, hopefully can share how painless and easy it was to no doubt go through all of that.
I'm sure it will be completely painless and easy, and you can be our guinea pig. And also, we're casting about for consultants who work with other tribal nations on getting through the process. So maybe we can do a little exchange later. Okay.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Matthew. Appreciate you making the time. And yes, now we get our latest, greatest addition to the show, Daniel Adomian.
You got it on the first try. That's
All right.
audible.
From the iBank. And Daniel, you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself, and I'll just acknowledge our colleague Dana Stroud, for even though she wasn't able to be here today, she was instrumental in connecting us with Daniel and the iBank team. And so we appreciate that, Dana, for when you're watching this recording later. And Daniel, the floor is yours.
Great. And thank you, Josh and Abigail, for helping to set this up. And it's a pleasure to be here with Phil and Matt as well. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. And I hope that this is all visible to you guys. Can you guys see that? I think I lose you when I'm in presentation mode.
It looks great, Daniel.
Yes, looks great.
It's great.
All right, so I am a climate finance analyst here at the California Infrastructure and Economic Development Bank. We call it iBank for short. And I'll first talk about just a little bit of our background and then dive into specifically the climate component here. And I want to do that just because the climate financing products that we have are a little bit more focused than everything that we have to offer. And given the broad mix of attendees here, there very well may be some solutions for you guys in our different pillars outside of climate financing. So iBank was founded in 1994. We are located within the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And we are the state of California's only general purpose financing agency. So we have broad authority to finance a number of different projects. And the very first thing that we started with back in '94 was the municipal lending with the Infrastructure State Revolving Fund. So this is anything and everything that cities, counties, joint powers authorities could need funding on. Typically, it's things like schools and roads, museums, water cleaning infrastructure, any number of things. We also have a bond unit that can issue both taxable and tax exempt bonds. Usually it ends up being tax exempt as we're working with those same municipalities. Later on, we absorbed a small business finance center, which allows us to do loan guarantees up to $5 million for small businesses under 750 employees. And also, as part of the Small Business Finance Center, we have a venture fund that exists basically to provide supportive capital to other venture funds. And we're specifically targeting disadvantaged communities. So it's a way to inject capital that's targeted in that sector. And then the most recent addition is our climate financing unit. We exist to provide specifically climate infrastructure loans and credit enhancement. And I'll get into some more of what that actually means. But for now, I will just say that we're a very, very new addition. We were only created in 2022, and we actually just this week announced our first deal, which was actually with Phil's group, with Blue Forest. And I can provide a little bit of context around that later, but we're definitely proud to have done that and to be partners moving forward on that. So as you may or may not be aware, there's this greenhouse gas reduction fund that was created as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And it overall is a $27 billion federal fund that has a scope that's nationwide, and it's divided into these three programs: the National Clean Investment Fund, or NCIF, the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, CCIA, that Matt made reference to, and Solar for All. We, as iBank, we applied in partnership with the State Treasurer's Office to functionally act as the state of California's green bank, specifically targeting the two on the sides, the NCIF and Solar for All. Solar for All is administered through the State Treasurer's Office, and then NCIF is, we are a named subrecipient, and so we'll be administering it together between iBank and STO. Within that, the National Clean Investment Fund totals 14 billion out of that total 27 billion, and it is split between three national green banks: Climate United, Coalition for Green Capital, and Power Forward Communities. And we, as iBank, are we applied as a coalition member for Coalition for Green Capital. And so out of the 5 billion, California stands to be receiving somewhere around 446 million. So that it's still not completely finalized. We're still working on finalizing that, and we do still have to get our board approval to officially launch, but CGC has one, and we are a named subrecipient. So now we're just kind of in those final stages, and we're gearing up to launch a number of financial products to help administer that capital. So the types of projects that we can finance are here on the left, this qualified projects. This is essentially the 6-factor test that will determine whether we can deploy this NCIF funding towards a project that you may have in mind. And it's important to note that anything that we finance has to meet all 6 of these. So it's got to reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions. It's got to reduce or avoid other air pollutants, and there's a whole list of what those are. It has to have other community benefits, largely based around climate resiliency, clean energy, pollution reduction, water resiliency, things like that. Workforce development also. And the next one, we have to mobilize private capital, and that's an important one. This is not administered as a grant. This is intended to create an entire ecosystem of private capital financing. And so to do that, as we are rolling these funds out, we need to be working in partnership with private finance, with the goal of making this a sustainable finance program for climate solutions. That 5th one may not have otherwise been financed. This one, basically, we want to be putting our funds towards projects that are additional to what's already out there in the marketplace. And then lastly, the commercial technology, our requirement, this actually comes from EPA, is that the projects that we finance need to have been available within the United States in at least 3 instances for at least 5 years each. The idea being that we don't want to be taking a risk on the technology side. We want these to be established technologies. Where we're stepping in is basically to provide this catalyzing capital to help reduce other risks and move these projects along that otherwise wouldn't have gone through. So those are the top level descriptors of what a qualified project is. And then as it is done in practice, we've got these three priority sectors here on the right: distributed generation and storage, net zero emission buildings, and zero emission transportation. I'll talk about each real quickly here. Distributed generation and storage includes, on the generating side, it could be anything, obviously solar, wind, geothermal is increasingly becoming something that we're looking into. Also, hydrogen fuel cells are eligible. And then on the storage side, this could be any battery technology. We could also do some of the other long duration storage that you may have heard of, as long as it meets that technology requirement. And in addition to the physical energy and the storage side, we're also capable of financing some of the necessary upgrades to the distribution grid. So some of those distribution grid issues are often an issue for getting projects off the ground. So if there needs to be an upgrade at a substation or something like that, we can help provide that financing. On the net zero emission building side, this is everything in the built landscape from HVAC to weatherization. It could include panel upgrades that are often necessary. So there's a wide range of applicability there. And then on the zero emission transportation, this could be anything from heavy duty trucking and electric school buses, all the way down to even off-road solutions like electric ocean ferries and personal mobility devices. So there's a lot of leeway there, and we can also do the financing for the actual EV charging infrastructure as well. Let's see. So as far as the actual products that we will be rolling out, there are 3 products: climate loan guarantee, loan participation, and an incentives bridge loan. Up that first one, the loan guarantee, we are saying deal sizes of between $1 and $20 million, up to 70% of a loan that we will provide our guarantee for. That loan must be senior debt. And there will be an originating fee and probably an annual service fee that's associated with that. We're actually still in the process of developing this. And I should actually preface all of these, because the program is still tentative. All of these products are themselves tentative, and they're pending finalization. But we are bringing these to market already. We're already having conversations with developers, installers, lenders, and we encourage you to have conversations about these as well. And you can share this information out with participants in the marketplace. On the right, I've got this DAC incentive for disadvantaged communities. So part of one of the tenets of this program is that we do want to be supportive of this capital being deployed in disadvantaged communities as much as possible. So we do provide these extra incentives if a project is sited within a disadvantaged community. So for this loan guarantee, we can expand the amount of coverage that we'll provide from 70% up to 80%. Next product down, the loan participation. For that one, the deal size is up to $30 million. And we will basically purchase or co-originate 50% of a loan value. So that $30 million feasibly could help finance up to a $60 million deal. Our biggest criteria with that is that we will be pari passu with the loan originator. So whatever third-party lender is coming in on a deal with us, we want to be on equal footing with them. There is one caveat to that, which is the disadvantaged communities incentive. So if we are involved at the point of origination and a project is in a disadvantaged community, then we're prepared to offer a below market interest rate as long as that gets passed through to the borrower. So the idea being, we'll help a project become more affordable in disadvantaged communities But on every other term, we want to be on equal footing with the originating lender. And we'll also be willing to expand that offer up to 60% of a loan value, just to help capitalize these projects as much as possible. And then the third product that we're launching is a climate incentives bridge loan, which Matt made reference to on both the ITC and also there are a number of state incentives, such as the CEC has a number of incentives. There are also utility incentives. So there are a lot of different incentives at different levels, from federal down to municipal. And one of the issues that we've heard from in the marketplace is that it's very often difficult to take advantage of those, just because it still ends up being a cash flow requirement as project developers are waiting to get that incentive paid out. So we will bridge that. For this product, we're capped at $25 million. There's basically two ways that we'll look at it. So if an incentive is considered earned, which is basically you've checked off all the boxes, you've qualified for it, and now you're just waiting for it to be paid out, we can finance that on the merits of the project itself. If you are in the process of still applying for that loan and for that incentive, and it hasn't been earned yet, we'll still loan against it, but we will want to look for some kind of other security at the company level, or some maybe it's a performance bond, just something else to make sure that if that incentive doesn't come through, that we're still protected, and we may ask to roll that over into long-term financing. But we're open to creative solutions. So looking to provide capital in the market where it's needed. And lastly, this disadvantaged community incentive for this one is that we can reduce the interest rate offered by 25 basis points. And I should say right here, the first two products that I mentioned, the loan guarantee and the loan participation, these are designed to work with third-party lenders. So we won't be doing the originating on that. What we'll ask is, when you guys have a project that you're considering or backing or whatever it is, we would like to be in the conversation with the third-party lender that will be the originator. And then we provide the supportive capital, whether that's the guarantee or the participation. For our third product, the incentive bridge, that is something that we'll be originating on our own. We'll be doing the servicing. Because of that, we do anticipate that it could take a little bit longer for us to do it all. And we're actually still in the process of developing the other underwriting and credit terms. So a lot of people ask, what sort of interest rates are you offering right now? I don't have that answer today, and we're still working on developing exactly what that would be. We do anticipate that it'll be competitive with market rates. And then for those two other products, the loan guarantee and the loan participation, the core terms of that will come from the originating lender. So the originating lender will set the interest rate. We just provide this capital to help support it. And hopefully, if we're involved at the originating stage, we can help ensure that they provide more favorable terms to a borrower. And then I want to circle back actually to the Blue Forest announcement. So this one is actually, leave it to it being the first deal that we've launched, that it's an exception to this rule. It's outside the realm of these three financial products. It's a hybrid note that we've done with CSAA. But I want to bring that up because although these are our three go-to-market products, we can be flexible. And we do have an RFI that's still open. So if there are areas of finance that aren't solved by these products, we still do want to hear about it. And maybe there's a way that we can come up with some kind of solution that works to serve the market, because that's really what we're here for. And last, this is my contact information. I've got my personal email up there, daniel.adomian@ibank.ca.gov. And also for accepting projects that you may have or RFI feedback that you may have, you can reach the team broadly at climatefinancing@ibank.ca.gov. And I do want to just kind of stress one more time that if there's a solution out there that isn't served directly by what I've mentioned here, still come to us, because there's a good chance that there may be financing solutions in the other pillars of iBank that have a little bit of a different target and different structure. But we want to be a resource for you and help you out as much as possible. So don't hesitate to ask any questions on that. And with that, I'll go ahead and pause and ask if you guys have any questions.
This is really.
Thank you, Daniel. Layla, do you have one?
I do, I
Great.
just appreciate, this is a really great rundown. I'm grateful for it, Daniel. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I know that the answer is going to be yes, but I'd love to hear you sort of play it out a little bit. I'm curious about about iBank's climate financing state of readiness for projects on tribal land for tribe controlled initiatives. Things like, are you prepared to waive sovereign or to forego waiver of sovereign immunity? Are there issues around financing projects on trust lands that you've found solutions for, or anything else that comes to mind?
Those are great questions. The short answer is I don't know. We were very open to partnerships with different tribal entities, and it is eligible, but we do have to approach it cognizant of those issues. I'm not aware of an instance that we can point to that we have gotten through those, but definitely open to being a partner and figuring out a way to move projects forward if they come across our desk.
Okay, that's good to know. And maybe someday we'll get to play together along with and I'm not going to speak for Ross because he's on here, but North Edge, obviously, our regional CDFI has plenty of lending experience in Indian country. So
okay, great.
Might change that.
Ross, do you have anything to say to that?
Yes, my head is just bursting
Fantastic.
with all this information, though I knew a lot of it. So full disclosure, we met with Matthew out at Blue Lake Rancheria to come up with ideas for, I don't want to say a template, but it's kind of funny. He showed bottom mini market, and that was just LED light, the standard thing. But we would like to find something like that, like they have at Blue Lake Rancheria. If anyone's been out there, because we took a tour, I don't know, 5 years ago, and all of a sudden it's all coming together, where their mini mart is actually, it's got a solar array and a whole schmeal and battery storage and stuff. But what's interesting for us, we have the 5 million available on the CCIA, the accelerator, but we're also a member of OFN, and we will be able to get another 5 million non-tribal to do the same thing. But what's interesting in our area is we have visualize a bottom mini market size business, and they both happen to be grocery stores. One's tribally owned and one isn't, that are getting eaten up by power and costs. We'd like to be able to, we talked to Matthew about this, coming up with, to oversimplify a template. So when you go out there, say, gee, you could do this solar array, do this, battery storage, it will save this amount of money, and now with the tax credits and this, and we have access to this money and some other tax credits and stuff, this is how much you're going to save. And it's kind of cool. So we're talking to Lake County because they have the same issue. I got a call. Well, it's hot. It's been hot down there. So it works for restaurants, mini marts, the whole schmeal, where all of a sudden, if you can save, and I don't have the dollar amount yet till we get a contractor out there, $1,000 or $2,000 a month in power generation, right where I'm sitting, we don't have a problem with the air conditioning, but they do when it's 110 down there. So, and they've got a lot more sun than we do. So how do we come up with a template for this? How do we utilize this? The other thing is we were talking to Matthew for this $88 million that this consortium, Hoopa, Yurok, Karuk, and Blue Lake Rancheria got for that line. How can we leverage some of this money for their match to get that process going? So we're looking at all of this, and we are an iBank guarantee lender. We have a loan right now up to the maximum 5 million, which is not energy related, but so it's not a big deal to switch over to the energy part. Our challenge is going to be to get our advisors, technical assistants that can go out to the smaller places and also the bigger ones and say, gee, this is what the savings is. Now I wasn't prepared to speak, but I mean, it's got the ultimate high, which is a win-win-win. You can get cost savings, which is really what some of our smaller businesses need. They're getting pillaged by PG&E, and then we get that under control. Then the climate impact, it comes with it. It's fabulous, but the actual businesses are interested in surviving first. So when you can show, hey, you're going to help save the planet, you're also going to get this, and that's what we're looking at, how to leverage this. And on the larger projects, like with that tribal consortium, I'm wondering if we can, and we're still working on it, if that can count as leverage, a loan that we leverage at below market rates initially to get some of that constructed. Will that count as a match for that 88 million they're getting? So we're kind of working on all this at the same time. And we've got all the right guns here for this. I mean, we have this asset with Blue Lake Rancheria. They were playing around with this 6 years ago. So now they've got it honed in, and it's like, wow, can we take this on the road for our rural area and do it for community facilities and smaller businesses? It's kind of exciting. It really is. So stand by.
You need some North Edge soldiers, it sounds like. Get out there and beat the street.
Well, we're kind of unique because, we're on two different consortiums. One is NCN, which is a Native Community Network. There was 5 awardees. They got the smallest, 400 million, but they had the smallest group. And there were also members of the largest group. They got 2.2 billion, which is OFN. But, our country is really kind of big, if you didn't notice that. And our version of rural is different than version of rural in the Midwest. And then it's just, we're kind of uniquely positioned where we have some technology experts out here, and our rural area really is kind of spaced out here. And this is really we could be a blueprint for them if we could kind of hone in on this, if that makes sense. Because up till, for years, you go out and the guy goes with his little clipboard, looks at solar. It says, well, gee, if you got the solar thing on your roof for your house, and this is what you're paying, this is a rebate, it's just a formula. You will save this amount. It's going to take you 7 years to earn it back. Okay, well, that's easy. Got it. Want to do the same thing for commercial businesses and community facilities. And what's also unique in our area, our whole area, is for community facilities and stuff, and Blue Lake already pioneered this. When you have an emergency, like when it's fire, there's fires in Redding and stuff, and they come over here, they've got it, the Blue Lake Rancheria, it's set up there like an island to air, what do you call it? It's like the air conditioning, but also the filtration. They've got their gas station as part of that microgrid island, which you need when people are evacuating one other spot and you need to pump some gas, you need the power on. I mean, all this stuff is related. So, and they've had time to practice on it. So if we can just pick the brain and take this on the road, and now that we have the tools to do it, kind of exciting. So that's
Great,
right.
let's
Yeah.
keep that one open.
Good.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Phil, I did think of a question for you that maybe would be helpful just in closing. Like, I don't know, if you touched on this, you can just say I touched on it and I'll get back to it. But what is like an optimal project to get started for Blue Forest up on the North Coast area? Because I know you got a lot going on in the Sierras, but it seems like we need that first North Coast example.
Yeah, it's a great question, Josh, and I think one we get asked a lot. I didn't touch on it specifically in my presentation, and we are doing some exploration currently in Sonoma and Napa counties to see what we can do on private lands in those counties. As a start, from our perspective, a small project's probably around $1 million, covering, say on average about 1,000 acres to 5,000 acres. That being said, we want to work where it makes sense, and what we really look for is, as I mentioned, we work from pilot to scale. So what we want to understand is there the long-term opportunity to deploy financing with partners and to develop projects that aren't just that first one-off project, but really have the opportunity for scaling that across a region in a way that I think the impact that we're looking to make only happens at scale. And so that's I think more what we look for than like say a minimum number or a minimum like acres that a project might yield.
So you need like a motivated, capacitated partner who has a long-term big vision, and your financing could help get that started and sustained.
That's correct, and likely holds the landowner relationships that, just us being an organization based in Sacramento, we're never going to be that entity, right? And so in some cases we call them an aggregator, but this could be a land trust, this could be a fire safe council, this could be, some organizing community organization that that would kind of be the bridge between us and getting enough landowners on board for financing to make sense.
Well, that's helpful. We'll translate that out. I just off the first one that comes to mind, of course, the North Coast Resource Partnership. And have you guys engaged with them already?
We are meeting with Karen, I believe, next week. We were supposed to meet with her this week. We've touched base with her before, but the timing hasn't been quite right, so we're checking in with her again. Yeah, it's a great
The
lead.
timing might be good because they are definitely, thought and act leaders in the forest, health arena, and they've got really great relationships across many counties and orgs, tribes as well. So worth taking a look at. It sounds like you're on the right track there.
Yeah, I think that's right. And they've also produced a number of publications that just really kind of have a similar worldview, like what are the economic opportunities and outcomes of forest restoration work on the North Coast, and really help us kind of make our case to beneficiaries. I think some of the challenges in working with the North Coast is you don't often have kind of the big utility beneficiaries outside of maybe a PG&E or something of that nature. And so that's, the water utilities of size don't quite exist there, but that just means we need kind of a different portfolio of beneficiaries to work on with projects there.
Right. Well, this has all been super interesting. Phil, Daniel, Matthew, thank you for making the time to present this information. It will live on the website, and I expect that there will be ripple effects that follow from this meeting, and will be a point of contact, as well as many of the others here on the call. This is an engaged group, and So appreciate you making the time, and we'll look forward to the next time that we can get together.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very helpful.